Today, you are going to build a full stack Next.js 14 app router application. We're going to use Supabase as our database, as well as a way to add authentication to our app. We're going to use Tailwind CSS for styling, and then we are going to deploy our application using Vercel. And the project that we're going to build is going to be a watch list. I'm into watches, as you may know if you've watched previous videos, but we're going to allow the user to sign in and basically create a watch wish list to where they can add, remove, update, edit, do all those things to their watch wish list for watches they want to purchase in the future. So without further ado, enjoy this course. I think that you are going to learn a ton. Try to make it all the way through. Try to build stuff on your own throughout this and do as much as you can on your own. Maybe you watch me do it first and then go try to do it on your own after the fact. As I think if you learn everything I go through in this course, you can really go and build pretty much anything that you want. So without further ado, enjoy the course. So we're going to start here at supabase.com, and I'm going to go to dashboard here at the top right. So https supabase.com, click on dashboard. Now, as you can see, I already have a project in here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go new project, and I'm going to click Code Ryan Solomon as my organization. Now, if you don't have a Supabase account, then you can create one for free and you should be all good to go. All right, so create a new Supabase account, go to the dashboard page, and then select Create New Project. And then what I'm going to name this is I'm just going to name it watch-list. And then for the password, I'm of course not going to tell you the password I'm using, but I'm going to type in my password here. And honestly, I'm probably going to delete this project after the fact, just so I can kind of share credentials and I don't have to worry about blurring those out. And then I can just delete everything once I get this video uploaded for you guys. So with that, I typed in the password here. I'm going to put West US, but pick whatever region is kind of closest to you here. And then I'm going to click Create New Project. So this is going to get created here. After a few seconds there, it kind of sets up our project here. But now that it has done so, what I'm going to do is head over to VS Code, and I'm going to open my terminal. And within my terminal, I'm going to run npx create next app at latest. So we're going to create a new template Next.js app. I'm going to call this watch-list. And then I'm not using TypeScript, no ESLint. I am going to use Tailwind CSS. I'm going to be doing my styles with Tailwind CSS, but I would probably recommend you do these as well. Now, you could do your own styles if you want. I'm going to use Tailwind CSS because I probably am going to be copying and pasting a lot of kind of styles that I've already written for this project in, just to kind of save some time. But if you're looking for more practice with Tailwind CSS, you can definitely write out your styles yourself. But the focus of this is more so just creating a full stack application, working on the kind of functionality of doing that within Next.js, rather than focusing too much on Tailwind CSS. But we're going to use App Router for this, and I'm not going to customize the default import alias. So once this is kind of all done here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go File, Open, and then open this project within VS Code. So I've opened this project up here, and now that it's in place, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my terminal again. And what I'm going to run is npx supabase migration new, and then I'm just going to call this watches is what I'm going to call my migration. So this should create a migration. You should see it getting added over here. And what that is basically like creating a new kind of version of the database here. And what I want to do is I want to head back to Supabase, and I want you to click on SQL editor. So right over here. And now that I have this open up, we're going to basically set up our watch table. So our database is going to be super simple. Supabase will automatically give us basically a table for our users. So we don't really need to worry about setting that up. But what we do need to set up is a table for our watches, because users are going to be able to save watches that they, potentially want to buy in the future. So we need to have a table that represents a watch. So this is going to have like the brand name, the model, the reference number, and that's honestly probably about all we need here. So what we're going to do here is we're going to use the SQL editor to write the SQL to create this database. Now, it's really not too difficult. Even if you don't know SQL that great, I think that you can definitely understand what we're doing here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do create table, and I'm going to call it watches. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do ID serial, and then it's just going to be primary key. So our watches are going to have an ID. But then we also want to connect a user to a watch effectively. So there should be a relationship between a user and a watch. So I'm going to do user underscore ID, UUID, references, auth dot users not null. And then from there, we're going to have a brand column that is text. We're going to have a model column that is also just text. We're going to have a reference number that is also just text. And then we'll have a created at, and it's going to be a timestamp with time zone. And the default is just going to be now. And then we are also going to do an updated at timestamp with time zone. Now, if you want to copy this from my GitHub, I totally understand, but we are going to add just a few more different things to this here. So we're going to enable row level security here. So I'm going to do alter table, and I'm going to spell table correctly. Watches enable row level security, and then semicolon following that. And then after that, we're going to also make sure users can view only their watches. So we're going to do create a policy, and it's going to be called users can view their own watches, period. On our watches table, I'm going to hit a return statement here, and then we're going to do for select using auth.uuid, and it's actually just going to be auth.uuid, excuse me. And then we're going to call that, and we're going to say equals user ID. So we just created a policy on our watches table that the auth UID has to equal the user ID. So in this user ID up here, it has to equal the ID that the authenticated user has. So we can only see watches that are connected to a user ID for the authenticated users, basically what we're saying here. We're also going to make sure that a user can only insert their own new watches, update their own watches, as well as delete their own watches. So I'm going to take a very similar approach here, but instead of saying for select here, it's going to be for insert, for update, and for delete. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy this policy here, and I'm going to paste it here on line 16, and it's going to be create policy, but it's going to be users can add new watches. So users can add new watches. It's going to be on watches, and it's going to be for insert. And then it's going to be, instead of using, it's going to be with check. Auth.uid, calling that is equal to user ID. And then behind both of these, I'm going to put a semicolon. And then we're going to do a very similar thing. So I'm going to copy the first statement here, paste this here, but instead of users can view their own watches, it's going to be users can update their own watches. So just change view with update. And then it's going to be for update using, so it's going to be using this time, auth.uid is equal to user ID. And then we want one more for deleting. So we're going to come down here, and then I'm going to say, create policies, users can delete their own watches on watches for delete using auth.uid is equal to user ID. So this is basically saying only the authenticated user can see watches tied to their user ID. So it's making sure that only the authenticated user can see watches for that specific authenticated user. So now that we have this in place, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click run. And then after running this, you should see success, no rows returned right here in the results next to run here. All right, so we've successfully created this table within our database, which should basically be all we need to do here for SQL when building this application. So now with this in place, let's go ahead and get started with setting up our authentication workflow. So to do this, let's head back to VS Code. So now here within our project, at the root of our project here, so on the same level as package.json, next.config.js, JSON config, I'm going to add a new file. And what this file is going to be is a .env.local file. So .env.local. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to add two environment variables that are effectively going to connect our project here to our Supabase database, as well as Supabase authentication. So what we'll do here is I will do next_public_supabase_URL, then an equal sign. And then below that, I will do next public_supabase_anon, ANON _key. So next public Supabase URL, next public Supabase anon key. And then we're going to go back to Supabase here. And I'm at my dashboard right now, just at my home. From here, where I'm going to go is I'm going to go to settings, and then I'm going to click on API here. And then when at API, you should see this anon public right here, as well as a URL. I'm going to go ahead and copy this URL, head back to VS Code, and then paste that as my next public Supabase URL. And then once that's pasted, I'm going to come back, and then next to anon public here, I'm going to copy this as well. And then head back, and then paste that into my anon public key right here. And that is all we need to do within this env file, so I'm going to now close that. So that has effectively connected Supabase to our VS Code or our Next.js project here. But now once that's installed, we need to install a couple different Supabase packages. So I need to run npm install at supabase/supabase-js. So a Supabase package is what we need to install there. And then once that's installed, we also need to install some different kind of helper packages here. So I need to install npm install at supabase/auth-helpers-next.js. And then I'm going to get these installed as well. But now that that's in place here, what I'm going to do is just run npm run dev. And we're going to start our server here. And I'm going to also click the plus icon to open a new terminal. So we have our server running here, and then just a new terminal right here. And then I'm going to go back, and I'm going to go to localhost 3000 here, and I'm going to click refresh. And we should see just the blanket Next.js kind of template right here. And we do see that. Now that this is in place, we can start to get things kind of set up here for our project. And the very first thing that we're going to do here is we're going to set up middleware. So middleware is effectively something that runs between a certain process. So like if we make a request to a certain URL, we might want to run some code on that request before that request completes. So we want to run middleware in the middle of like kind of two different pieces of software is effectively what it is, hence middleware. So I'm going to come back here, and in the root of my project here, so on the same level as my env.local, I'm going to add a new file, and that is going to be middleware.js. And then I'm going to also close my terminal. And what's about to come here is going to be some stuff that is a little bit more Supabase specific, but it should be pretty straightforward here. So within this middleware file, what we're going to do is import, and then I'm going to just do an empty object for now, but it's going to be from, and it's going to be at Supabase auth helpers Next.js. And what we're going to import is going to be create middleware client. So I'm going to type CRE, and then we see create middleware client. So that's a little thing that I like to do is I first do import empty curly braces and then the package I want to import. And then from there, I can kind of get that nice code completion from this package here within VS Code. And I'm using the theme winter is coming, just in case you're wondering. But I'm going to also import from next/server. And what I'm going to import is the next response. So next response. And then within this middleware file, we need to export a function, which is going to be the middleware that we want to run between like two different pieces of software before the kind of a request completes. And I'll explain this a little bit more here. So we're going to export an async function, and I'm going to title it middleware. It's going to take a request. And then within our middleware here, we're going to say const res is equal to next response dot next. So we're using next response to basically get a response here. And then once we have this request as well as the response, we can then use Supabase. So we can say const Supabase is equal to create middleware client. And then we're going to call that function and pass in an object in which we're going to set a request property, which is equal to request. So we're using JavaScript shorthand notation here to say REQ is equal to REQ. And then we're going to do the same thing for res. So the rec property is going to be our request. The res property is going to be the result of calling next response. And then from here, we want to get our current authenticated user if we have an authenticated user. So what we're going to do is say const, and this is going to be data colon curly braces user is equal to await supabase.auth.get user. So calling supabase.auth.get user, it's going to return a data object. And on this data object is going to have a user property. So we are kind of using nested destructuring here to first destructure the data object or the data property returned from the get user object. And then we're destructuring the user property from this data property that we are initially destructuring. So we're using nested destructuring to get the user. And then what we're going to do is we're going to check if there is a user and do some different redirects depending on if there is a user or not. So I'm going to first say, if we have a user, so if user, and the request.next URL.path name is equal to our home route, then we actually want to do a redirect. So if they're trying to go to the root of our application, but they already have a logged in user, we don't want to allow that, because what we want to do is if they have a logged in user, we just want to point them to our logged in watch page. We don't want to send them to our root of our application, because for us, that's just going to be a sign in page. So here I'm going to check if user and request.nextURL.pathname is equal to just empty slash our root directory. We then want to use our next response, and then we're going to call the redirect function on this, and we're going to redirect them to a new URL, all capital for URL. Then we're going to redirect them to our watch-list route. And then the second argument is going to be the request.url. So our request URL is basically going to be our base URL, but we want to redirect them to the watch list path. And we will eventually create that route here within our project here as well. So if we have a user and they're trying to go to our login page effectively, then redirect them to the watch list page. And then we're going to do a very similar check here, but we're going to check basically if they are not logged in and they're not going to the home route, then redirect them to the home route. So we're going to say if we don't have a user and not double at, but double and the request.next URL.path name does not equal the home page, then what we're going to do is return a next response dot redirect. And then we want to redirect them to new URL empty slash, and then the base URL is going to be our request.url. So if they don't have a logged in user and they try to access a path name that isn't our login page, redirect them back to our login page. And then once we are done with that, we can just return our response. Now, we also need to decide when we want this middleware or what paths we want this middleware to run on. And for us, we just want this middleware to run when they try to visit our homepage or our watch list. Those are going to be our only two public routes. So that's where we want our middleware to run. So I'm going to do export const config. It's equal to an object in which we're going to set a matcher property, matcher, and it's going to be an array that has a empty slash as well as a string that is our watch list route. So we're basically saying run this middleware when they try to access the homepage or the watch list page, and basically do these redirects as appropriate here. All right. So that should pretty well set up our middleware here. Let me just like refresh this page, make sure I didn't break anything. Now, currently we shouldn't have a user because we haven't really set any of that up. So if I try to go to -watch, list, we should see we immediately get redirected to our homepage, which we did see that occur right there. And I'll do it one more time so you know I'm not lying. I try to go to watch list here. You see I immediately get redirected back to our homepage because that is our middleware running in the middle of that kind of a request response cycle before that request completes. And it's redirecting us back to the homepage because we at this point don't have a logged in user. So hopefully that gives you a good understanding of how middleware works. And I think you're going to learn a whole bunch of stuff like that throughout this course. So moving forward here, we want to start setting up an ability for the user to log in. And for our application, we're going to use a different technique. I have, a video on authentication with Firebase, as well as AppWrite, as well as Supabase, where we do just basic email and password login. But what I want to show you in this tutorial is how you can actually use a magic link. And this is awesome. And I think you're really going to like it. So let's head back to VS Code here. And what we're going to do is add a new component for this. So I'm going to exit middleware.js. Within my app directory here, I'm going to add a new folder. And this folder, it is going to be called components. And then within our components folder, we're going to create a component called auth form.jsx. And for this auth form, we are going to have to install a library for it. And it's going to be another kind of Supabase library. So we're going to run in our terminal here, npm install, and this is going to be at supabase /auth-ui-react. We're going to install this package here. And then after that's installed, we're going to set up this component. Now, this is going to be a client component. So at the top of this file, it's going to be use client. And then here we're going to import. And what we're going to import is auth. And it's going to be from auth UI React. So Supabase auth UI React. And we're importing the auth component. And then we're also going to import create client component client from Supabase, Auth, helpers, Next.js. So right there. And I'm just realizing that I don't really need to use that curly brace trick that I use. It's kind of giving me really code completion right here. Sometimes I use the curly brace trick, and I'm kind of used to doing that because when I'm creating bigger projects, I'll kind of run out of memory, so I won't get that completion right away. But this is actually working just well, so I might kind of move forward with that the rest of this project, in case you're wondering why I'm not using the kind of curly braces thing that I do. But what we're going to do here is export a default function, and it's going to be called auth form. And then what we're going to do here is I'm going to say const Supabase is equal to create client component client, and then we're going to call that function. And then from here, all we need to do is return, and I'm going to return our auth component here, but we're going to add some props to this component. So first off, we're going to set a Supabase client prop to Supabase. So this is going to be basically the connection between our project and this auth component. And we're going to set a view prop, and this is going to equal magic underscore link. So it's going to be a magic link component. And then we're going to say show links, and that is going to equal false. And then we're going to say providers, and that's just going to be an empty array. And then our redirect here, which we will make this in just a second here, but we're going to say our redirect to is going to equal http:// and it's going to be local host 3000, and then it's going to be /auth /callback. So it's going to redirect us to localhost 3000 /auth /callback. Now we are going to need to create that in just a second, but we're also going to add one more prop here, and I'm going to do appearance. And this is where we're going to add some different kind of styles here. So we're going to set a theme, and it's going to be equal to dark, because our kind of components are all going to be dark theme. And then for our button here, it's going to be set to class name, and this can be Tailwind CSS classes. So this is going to be BG-white-400. The text, we're going to make it gray and 900. And then on hover, we're going to make it a background of gray 600, just to kind of change it just a little bit. And then below button, we're also going to say input, and then add a class name. And then for our input, it's going to be background. It's going to be gray 700. Border, it's going to be gray 600, and it's going to be text white. So just adding a few kind of styles there. We won't manually write out the styles for everything here, but since that was pretty quick, we'll just kind of leave it at that. But now we want to add this auth form to our login page. So I'm going to go to our root page.js, and I'm going to rename this to JSX for better code completion here, and not JSZ, JSX here. And then for this component, what we're going to do is remove everything currently within the return statement. So it's just an empty return statement. I'm also remove image. And then what we're going to do is import auth form from components /auth form. And then here we're going to have just a wrapper div. And then within that div, we're going to have another div, and then we're going to have an each one. And this is going to be welcome to watch list, the name of our application. And then below that, we're going to have a paragraph. And then we're going to say your personal space to curate and manage a wish list of your favorite watches. Sign in to create, view, edit, and delete watches from your wish list. And I'm not totally sure if wish list is one word, two words, but we're going to leave it at that. Feel free to look that up and verify that I'm not losing my mind. But we're also going to do a div below that paragraph tag, and that's where we're going to render the auth form. Now, this is going to look pretty ugly, and let me just head back to localhost 3000 and verify that. So this looks nasty. So what I'm going to do is now add some Tailwind classes to this. It's going to be a decent amount, so I'm not going to manually write all of them out, but feel free to go to my GitHub repo, go to page.jsx within my app here, the root page, copy and paste these styles in if you want, or if you also want to kind of do what I did to create this project, just copy and paste this HTML here, paste it into ChatGPT and be like, hey, style this React JSX here using Tailwind CSS, and you can kind of give it a theme to follow, like, you know, make it a black and gray color scheme or something along those lines. So do that, or just copy and paste the styles I have, but I'm going to do that, and then I'll see you in a second. So I now have all of this in here, and I realized I used just a little bit different copy in like the project that I created to, you know, figure all this out beforehand. And that's another thing to note too, is like, I create these tutorials beforehand just so it goes more smoothly when I create it for you guys. So if it feels like, you know, I know every little thing here with this project, it's because I already kind of built this out and tested around and ran into issues. So don't feel bad if like this feels like a lot, because, you know, it's not my first time creating this. So just wanted to, you know, be transparent about that as well. But this should look a lot less disgusting, and it does. I actually think that this looks, you know, this might be a little bit large, maybe something like my grandma would need, but, you know, it looks fine. It's good enough for the sake of this project to look pretty good. So what you can see here is eventually I'm going to type in my email here, click send magic link. I'm going to go to my email. I'm going to have my magic link. I'm going to click on it, and then it is going to take me to my website, but I'm going to already be logged in. But to do that, we do need to follow a few more steps here. So the first one here is, notice how in my auth form, we set our redirect to localhost 3000 auth callback. And if you go to deploy this app, make sure that you change this, or else the redirect wouldn't be right. You would need to use some sort of like base URL based on, you know, whatever you configure in deployment here. But ours is going to be /auth/callback. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create a new route here that is going to be within an auth callback folder. So within our app directory, I'm going to create a new folder, and it's going to be called auth. And then within my auth folder, I'm going to create another new folder, and it's going to be called callback. And then within my callback folder, I'm going to create a new file. It's going to be a route.js. So this is how we create a route handler within a Next.js application. And then here we are going to import create route handler client from Supabase auth helpers Next.js. And then we're going to import cookies from next headers. And then we're going to import next response from next server. Now we need to export an async function, and we're going to handle a get request here. And it's going to accept a request, and we're going to enter the body of this function. But here we're going to say const cookie store is equal to calling the cookies function from next headers. And Supabase uses cookie-based authentication within Next.js. And the main reason for that is to handle server and client components, because we can pass these cookies to the client or the server to check for our current authenticated user. So once we have our cookie store, we say const Supabase is equal to create route handler client, and we're going to call it. But we're also going to pass in an object. And as a property on this object, we're going to set cookies. And then for our cookies property, we're going to point to a function that just returns our cookie store. So return our current cookies from our next headers. So that's basically allowing us to get our cookies within our application. But then we're going to say const search params, and we're destructuring it from a new URL. It's going to be our request URL. So get our search params from our request URL. And on our request URL, when we use our magic link, it's automatically going to have a code search param. So we're going to say const code is equal to search params dot get code. And then if we have that code in our search params, which we definitely should, we want to await Supabase dot auth dot exchange code for session and then pass in our code. So when we click on this magic link that we will have within our email, it will send us to this route here, and it will have a code in the search params of this route. And then once we have that code, this route handler will run and it will call Supabase auth exchange code for session. We'll pass in the code and we'll return a current session for the user with that email address, and it will automatically create this session for us. And once that's done, we can return a next response dot redirect. And where do you think we want to redirect to? Well, we want to redirect to the only other route that we're going to have, which is going to be /watch-list. And then we're going to set the request.url as our base URL. So just to reiterate here quickly, we're basically making this route handler in which our auth form is going to use. So we're going to, click on this auth form. We're going to click on the magic link, and it sends us to this auth callback route handler. It's going to have a code in the search params, and we're going to be able to use that code to then create a new session here, a cookie-based session, because we also create this route handler client using our own cookie store within our Next.js app. And then if all goes well there, we're then going to redirect to our watch list page. So this should be kind of all set up for us here. But before we test this out, what I do want to do is within our app folder, let's create our watch list route. So I'm going to create a new folder. It's going to be watch-list. And within our watch list folder, I'm going to create a page.jsx file. And all we're going to do for now is export a default function watch list. And then let's just return an H1 that says watch list. And now, after we're authenticated here, we should be able to see our H1 that just says watch list after we finish the flow. So let's come back here and let's go ahead. I'm going to just refresh for good measure. And I'm going to type in my email address here. I'm going to click send magic link. So it says sending link, and then it says check your email for the magic link. So let me go do that now. So right here, you should see that I had this email from no reply, supabase.io, confirm your sign up, follow this link to confirm your user. So I'm going to confirm your mail. I'm going to click on that, and it's going to redirect me to localhost 3000 /watch list. And as you can see, I now see my watch list page. And if our route handler is working earlier, if I try to go back to my home route here, it should redirect me back to watch list because I now have a current signed in user. So you see, I try to do it, and then it sends me right back to watch list. So now that that's in place, what we should do is, well, let's first verify that we have a user within our database. So I think I can see that within database, and I don't see it within watches. Let me actually go to authentication. And yes, I do see one user right here. So if you go to authentication, you should see a user with whatever email you use for your magic link. So pretty cool, right? Like, I think that's a very cool way. And and a very easy way of allowing someone to sign in. It's like, hey, just give me your email. We're going to send you this link. Click on it and you're all good. You don't need to type in a password, none of that, which is pretty dang cool if you ask me. So now that that's in place, what I think makes sense now is we should probably set up this watch list page a little bit more. Now, we're not going to set up all the functionality yet to like add, delete, and update watches, but let's just kind of set up kind of a skeleton watch page and put in some placeholders for those functions. So let's just create kind of the UI for it. And then let's also create a sign out function so the user can actually sign out, because currently they literally could just see this page and they can't go anywhere else. So heading back to VS Code here, what I want to do is go to my watch list page.jsx. And for now, let's just kind of skeleton out what we're going to want here. So I'm going to remove my each one. And instead, I'm going to return a div, and then a div within that div, and then another div within that div, and then it's going to be an each one. And let me move that to a different line here. And this is just going to say watch list, or it can even say maybe my watch list. I don't know, but we'll kind of put that in there for now. Then we're also going to want to add maybe a sign out button to the top of this page as well. So we're going to do a form, and the action is actually going to be a URL that we're going to use to sign out. So I'll explain this all in just a second, but it's just going to be /auth/sign out. And we will create this in just a second, but we will set the method is equal to post. And within our form, all we're going to do is add a button that is going to be of type submit, and it's going to say sign out. So we now have an H1 with a button of type submit. This is sign out. Now, below this form, we have a closing div, but then below that, we're then going to have basically a watch form right here in which a user can input the brand, model, and reference number and submit a watch. But this is going to be a separate component that we're going to create. So for now, let's just add watch list, the component, and within our components page, let's just do a new file, and I'm going to call it watch list.jsx. And then I'm just going to export a default function, and I'm going to call it watch. No, it shouldn't be watch list. It should be watch form. My bad. So let's change this to watch form. Let's get watch form. And then for now, let's just return like, I don't know, paragraph that just says ... watch form. And we'll fill this out here a little bit later. But now within our watch list, this should not say watch list right here. This should actually just say watch form. And we should import that from components watch form. And then below this watch form here, we're going to have another div. And then within this div, this is where we're going to render out our watch list. Now, currently, we don't have any watches to map over. So eventually we're going to get our watches from our database. But right now, I'm just going to say const watches is equal to an empty array. So just a blank empty array here. And then within this div, this is where we're going to map over our watches and return all of them within this page. So we're going to say watches.map, and then it's going to accept a watch. And then within this return statement here, and I'm actually not going to use curly braces, I'm just going to use a return straight away. We're going to render out another div. And this div is going to have a key that is going to be equal to watch.id. And then we're going to add some class names here in a second. But for now, within this div, we're going to add an h1. And this is going to be our watch.brand, as well as our watch.name within that h1. And this actually probably makes more sense to be like an h2 here and an h2 here. And then below that, what we're going to do is we're going to show them the watch brand as well as the model. But now we need a way for them to edit as well as delete a watch, because they're going to be able to add watches, update the watches they've added, delete them, so on and so forth. So we're going to add another div here. And then within this div, this is going to be a form in which the action, eventually this is going to be a server action that we use here. But for now, just call it delete watch. We will replace this with a function here in just a little while. But within this form, what we're going to have is an input. And this input is going to be of type. It's actually going to be a hidden input. And this is just so we have some extra data for our delete watch server action. I know this is a lot right now, but just follow with me for a second. I will explain all this in the future when we go to implement this. We're really just skeleting this out a little bit. But now I'm going to do name is equal to ID, and the value is going to equal watch.id. This is important because when we call this delete watch server action, we want to have the watch ID that we want to actually delete. And we're going to set a button, and the type of this button is going to be equal to submit. And this is just going to be a delete button. And then just outside this form, we're going to have another component, but this component is going to be an edit watch component. And the purpose of this component is going to be that when they click on this component, it's going to pop up a modal that has all their watch information they can edit, and then basically make a patch request to our database to change that watch. So I'm going to type in edit watch, and then it's going to have one prop that is going to be equal to the watch. And then we're just going to close that component. And then as we did before, I'm going to go to components, new file, and it's going to be edit watch.jsx. We're just going to export a default function called edit watch with one prop that is going to be a watch. And then for now, let's just return a paragraph that says ... edit watch component. All right. So that is it. I know that might've been a lot, but we really just kind of wanted to skeleton this out a little bit. But now I do want to add some styles to this page. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste those styles in here. You can use the same approach of ChatGPT earlier, or you can go to my GitHub and copy and paste everything you see over. Just make sure that if you do copy and paste it over, like this will be pointing to an actual function. Make sure to just make it a string. So let me go ahead and I'm going to copy and paste what I see here from GitHub. And then once that's pasted in, I'm going to just update the formatting here a little bit so it doesn't look gross. And then instead of this being delete watch, just make that a string. I also have like, a comment in here that I'm going to get rid of. And since I just got rid of it now, it shouldn't be there for when you see this. I believe everything should now be good, but maybe just, double check and make sure that this is all kind of working for you, but we should have everything that we need. We do need to import edit watch here. So we're going to import that at the top here from components edit watch. If I come back here, we should see my watch list, and then we just see like watch form ... This will eventually be a form where they can add their watches and submit them. And then we'll have the delete and edit buttons like we have down here, but we're only going to see those if we actually have any watches. And we haven't got those from the database yet. So we're not going to have any watches. It's just this empty string or this empty array. But right now, if I click sign out here, it's not going to work because currently signing out, it just makes this like request here to auth/sign out, which we haven't created yet, but we're going to do that now. So within the auth folder, create a new folder called sign out. And within sign out, I want you to create a route.js file. And this is where we're going to handle signing out the user. So this is actually going to be very similar to signing in the user. So we're going to import, create route handler clients from Supabase Auth helpers Next.js. And then from here, we're going to import cookies as well from next headers. And then we're going to import next response from next server. And then we're going to export an async function post. It's going to accept a request. And then we're going to say const cookie store, just like we did earlier, is equal to calling cookies. And we're going to say const Supabase is equal to create route handler client, call that function, pass in an object and set the cookies property to point to a function that returns our cookie store. And then we're going to say const curly braces data colon curly braces session. So it's going to return an object that has a data property. That data property is going to point to an object that has a session property, and we are destructuring that here. But we're going to set this to equal await supabase.auth.get session. So we're going to get the session here, and we're going to say if there is a session, then what we want to do is await supabase.auth.sign out. So we're going to sign out of our session. And then we also want to redirect them back to our home page. So we'll return a next response dot redirect. And we're going to do that to a new URL. And it's going to be our home route, which is going to be request dot URL as our base path name. But we're going to also pass another argument here. And we're just going to pass a status of redirect. So 302. So when they click on sign out right here, they are going to make a request to auth/sign out, which is going to be this route handler right here. We're going to accept the request right within this post right here. And we're going to get our current session from Supabase. And then we're going to sign out of that session and then redirect them back to the home page. So if we've done everything correctly here, we should be able to come back, click on sign out, and then it should take us back to our homepage here. And we see that works, and we're not redirected because we no longer have a session. And if I try to go to watch list, I get redirected back to my homepage because we don't have a session. But if I type in, let's do a new email, ryan@coderyan.io, I'll send the magic link, and then let's go to that email, and then I'm going to click confirm your mail, and then it redirects me back to my watch list here. If I try to go back to my home route, I can't do so because I'm already logged in. But if I log out, it takes me back to my login page. And then if I check my kind of auth Supabase, I now see I have two different users, Ryan@coderyan.io, Ryan@ryansolomon.io. If I want to relog in to my let's just do Ryan@coderyan.io again, I can just send this magic link again here, head back to my email, click on log in, and then we should see my watch list page. So we have successfully connected Supabase to our Next.js project here, allowing us to add users to our project, sign in and sign out. So the authentication piece of this project is pretty much done here. But now that this is in place, let's now start setting up this watch list page to where they can type into a form, submit new watches, update them, delete them, and kind of show you how to use basic kind of create, read, update, and destroy within our Supabase database. So back in VS Code here, what I want to do now is instead of just hard coding this watches as an array here, I think it's time that we now connect this to our database and actually get our watches from our database. So to do this, what we're going to need to do at the top of this function is say const cookie store is equal to calling cookies from next headers. So this will give us access to our cookies, very similar to what we've done before with middleware and our route handlers. And then once that's in place, we're going to say const Supabase is equal to create server component client because we are in a server component right now, and this is going to stay a server component. So we're going to call that. And then when we call that, we're going to pass in an object in which we're going to set the cookies property to a function that returns our cookie store. And then now that we have that in place, we can get our user session. So we can say const data, and then within that data object, it's going to have a session property, and that is going to equal await supabase.auth.get session. So we're going to get our session from Supabase, and when we call this, we are going to destructure data and destructure session within data. And this should be an async function watch list. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And now that we have the session, we can say const user is equal to session, and then I'm going to use the question mark operator dot user. So our user is going to be a session.user. And then below this, we can say const data, and then we're going to destructure data, but I want to name our data to be watches. So we're going to set data as watches, and then comma error is equal to await, and this is going to be Supabase dot from, and we're going to get data from our watches table, and then we're going to dot select, call that function. We're going to pass in star. So just like the SQL, using a star, we're going to get everything from our watches table, but we're only going to get stuff. So .eq, and then we're going to call that, and then it's only going to be the stuff where the user ID is equal to our user.id. And let me move all these onto a separate line here. And then we also are going to give an order to this. So we're going to say .order, and we're going to order it by brand name, and we're going to set ascending to be true. And then I'm going to remove this watches constant. So here what I'm doing is I'm saying from our Supabase connection here that we've created here with our cookie session, we want to get the watches table, return all of our columns in which the user ID of that table is equal to our currently logged in user, and make sure to order those by brand in which ascending is true, so alphabetically. And then the only other thing that we need to do here is say, if there is an error, then I'm just going to console.error fetching watches. So this should return all of our watches from our database. So let me go ahead. I'm going to console.log watches here. We shouldn't have any watches currently because we haven't added the ability. But what we should see is that if I refresh my watch list page, then I should just see an empty array here, and there should not be an error fetching these watches. So let's go ahead and check that. So I'm here at my watch list. I'm going to refresh this page, head back to VS Code, open my terminal, go over here, and I do see watches as an empty array. So theoretically, we have everything set up here to now read our watches from our database. And it's pretty cool that we can do this just like right within this server component here. We didn't need to make a use effect and then make a network request here. I can just get these watches right away in this server component and then render those within this page. But now that this is in place, what we can do is I can implement this watch form, which will allow us to actually add our watches. And then once we can add watches, we should be able to see them rendered on this page right here. And then we need to add the ability to delete watches. So we'll implement this delete watch action here. And then following that, we will add the ability to edit these watches. And then we can go ahead and deploy this project here. So the first thing that we're going to do is head over to watchform.jsx. So here, it's mostly just going to be a form that we use a server action to add watches. So instead of what we currently render right here, I'm going to remove this p tag, and all we're going to do is add a form. So we're going to return a form here. And the action is eventually going to be add watch. I'm just going to hard code it as a string right now. But within this form, we're going to have a wrapper div. Then we're going to have a label in which the HTML4 is going to be for a brand. And then the name of this label is just going to be brand. So this is going to basically be an input where they can input the brand of the watch they want to buy. So the input here, it is going to be of type text. The ID is going to be equal to brand. The name is going to be equal to brand, and it is going to be a required input. We'll add some class names to this in just a second. And then we're going to do a very similar thing. Below this, we're going to do another div, and it's going to have a label. It's going to be HTML4 model, and the label is just going to be model. And then we're going to have another input here. The type is going to be text. The ID is going to be model. The name is going to be model, and it also is going to be required. And then we're going to add one more input here. So I'm going to just copy and paste this below. But now it's going to be HTML4 reference number. So they can put the reference number of the watch. And then I'm going to put reference number here. And then the ID and name are both going to be reference number. And then at the bottom of this form, we're going to do a button that is going to be of type is equal to submit. And it's going to just be add watch. So this is going to be our HTML for this page. Now I'm going to go ahead and add the styles for this page. You can go ahead and copy and paste these, or you can also do what we've done earlier and ask ChatGPT to style this within Tailwind CSS. So I've gone ahead and added these styles here. But now that this is in place, what I do want to do is I want to now go ahead and add this server action for this form. So when the user clicks on this add watch button, we use a server action to basically add this watch to our database. So the way that we're going to do this is within my app folder here, I'm going to create another folder, and it's going to be called server-actions. And within this server actions folder, I'm going to create an action that is just going to be add watch.js. And within this add watch server action, at the top of the file, I'm going to call this use server. Also going to import, and it's going to be create server client component from Supabase Auth helpers. And then we're going to import revalidate path from next cache. And then we're also going to import cookies from next headers. And then we're going to export an async function called add watch. It's going to accept form data. So automatically when we submit this form, it is going to pass us the form data. So all the data with our like names and ID inputs. And then here we're going to get the data at the top of this function. So I'm going to say const model is equal to form data.get, and it's going to be model. And then I'm going to option shift down arrow to copy that down the line. And then this is going to be brand. And then we're going to do form data.get brand. And then I'm going to do option shift down arrow. And then it's going to be const reference number is equal to form data.get reference number. So we're basically getting our brand here, as well as our model, as well as our reference number from our submitted form within our server action. And then now we need to connect to our database. So we need to do the same thing that we've done this entire time, which we're going to do const cookies store is equal to calling the cookies function. Then we're going to say const Supabase is equal to create server component client. We're going to call this, pass it an object in which we set the cookies property to point to a function that returns our cookie store like usual. And then we're going to say const and then destructure data and then destructure session within our data object is equal to await supabase.auth.get session. So we're going to get a currently active session here. We're going to say const user is equal to session (user) to make sure there's a session. Then we want to do a quick check here and just say if not user, then console.error and say that user is not authenticated within add watch server action. And then we'll just do an early return here. But if we do have a user, then what we want to say is const data common error or comma error is equal to await. I'm going to do Supabase. And then on the next line, I'm going to say dot from watches. So get our watches table. And then I want to dot insert. We're going to call the insert function and we're going to pass it an array. And within this array, this is where we're going to add an object that has our model is going to equal our model. Our brand is going to equal our brand. And then our reference underscore number is going to equal our reference number. And then our user underscore ID is going to equal our user.id. And then from here, we're going to check if there's an error. Then we want to, let me scroll down further, console.error. And I'm just going to say that there's an error inserting data. And I'm going to just do a comma and then console log the error as well. And then we'll just do an early return here. But then if that's not true, if that is successful, then we're going to call the revalidate path function. And the path that we want to revalidate is our watch list. And then we're just going to return a message that has success. So to kind of take you through what we just did there, we created a server action that first gets our brand, model, and reference number from our form data. Then we can create a server client here that's going to have our session. If we don't have a user, we're just going to early return in console.error. But if that is not true, then we are going to call this Supabase function to insert our model, brand, and reference number, so a new watch, within this user ID or this user's table. And then if that does not error here, we're going to make sure to revalidate our watch list page so we actually see our updated watch within our page. And then if we go back to our watch form, instead of hard coding add watch here, what we need to do is actually just make this our add watch server action. So now I think we have everything in place here to test this out. So if we come back, we now see we have a form here with brand, model, and reference number, and we can try to add a watch. So I'll do a Rolex Submariner. This is maybe one of my favorite watches of existence. I don't know the reference number, so we'll just do 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I'll click add watch. And what you see added here is a Rolex Submariner. It has a delete button and an edit watch component. So it looks like we have successfully added this watch here with our server action. And then we map over our watches and render out our watch brand and watch model with a delete watch button here, as well as our edit watch component, which is what we see here. And then if I look at my console, I see the added watch here for this user. So we have successfully used a server action here to add this watch. And if I don't add this revalidate path here, let me comment that out and let's add another watch. So I'll do a Rolex Daytona. We're naming a bunch of watches I can't afford. And we'll do 1, 2, 3, 3. And I'll click add watch. And what you see is I don't see it immediately, but then if I refresh my page, I do see it. And that's why we need that revalidate path, because we need to make sure to clear the cache here and revalidate our watch list page. So now that I reinstated it here, let's do an omega. We'll do a C master and we'll just do 1, 2, 2, 1. And now I'll click add watch and we see it gets added right away without me needing to actually go ahead and refresh my page. So we have successfully added the ability for a user to go ahead and add a watch here, which is pretty dang cool. But now that we have this in place, let's go ahead the ability to delete a watch. Because right now, if we click delete, nothing's going to happen. So we need to come back here and we're actually going to do this with a server action. Because here within my watch list page, we see we have a delete button, which is just a form that's going to call this delete watch action. So to do this, within my server actions folder, I'm going to add a new file and it's just going to be delete watch.js. And then within this delete watch component, it's actually going to be pretty similar to what we did to add a watch. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy my add watch file, Command C, and then Command V. But then we just need to structure this a little bit differently. So for our form data, at least for the name of this, it's going to be delete watch instead of add watch. And then for the form data, instead of getting the model brand and reference number, we're just going to get the watch ID, which is going to be form data.get, and it's going to be the ID. And then we're going to delete the brand as well as the reference number. And then from here, we're still going to have our cookie store. We're still going to create our Supabase create server component client. And then we're still going to get our session and we're still going to get our user. If we don't have our user, I'm going to say user is not authenticated. And this should actually be within. So let me go change this in my add watch to within. But user is not authenticated within the delete watch server action, and then we'll return. But now here, instead of inserting a watch, what we need to do is say const, and we'll just say const error is equal to await Supabase dot from watches. But instead of calling insert, we actually want to call dot delete. And what do we want to delete? Well, we want to delete the watch that matches. So we're going to call it dot delete dot match, in which we'll pass in an object and we'll say the ID is equal to the watch ID, and then the user ID is also equal to our user.id. So it's saying delete this watch with this ID or the user that is currently logged in. And then if there's an error, I'm going to say error deleting data, and then we'll console log the error. But if it is successful, then we will revalidate the watch list path just like we did earlier, because if we don't, we're not going to see the updated list with a deleted watch. And then we'll return a message of success here. So this should be our server action all set up here. And now within our watch list page, instead of the hard-coded delete watch, we can just do delete watch as our server action and make sure that's imported up above here. So now, if I come back, we should be able to successfully delete. Let's delete the Rolex Daytona. And we do see it gets removed from our page. Let's delete the Submariner. It gets deleted, but we really like the Submariner, so we need to go ahead and add that back to our page here. And we can see we get it added right back. So hopefully this shows you how powerful server actions are here. We're doing like a lot of this just from the server, and we're validating our paths here. And this can really improve performance and, prevent a lot of network requests and a lot of complexity, because we're able to just make all these requests from the server here. So pretty cool. We now have the ability to get all of our watches from the database. We can create new watches, and we can also delete watches. So really the final piece of functionality to implement here is how to edit a watch. And we're going to do that by implementing our edit watch component. So if I head back to VS Code here, we have this edit watch component that accepts a watch. So all we need to do to finish out the functionality here of creating, reading, updating, and deleting watches is this edit watch component. So let's go within that component. And what we're going to do here is we're going to create a component where if they click on the edit watch button, we're going to pop up a modal that has basically our watch form pre-filled, in which they can edit the information they added. And when they click on save, it's going to update our database. Now for this, since the user is going to click on this button and pop out a modal, so there's going to be this user interaction here, we are going to make this a client component. So it's going to be use client at the top. Now we're still going to use server actions for this, because we can use server actions within client or server components, especially the way that we structured server actions. So I'm going to import use state from React. And eventually we're going to also import an update watch server action. We'll hold off on that for a second. But here at the top of this function, we're going to say const show modal, set show modal is equal to use state, and we'll initialize it to false. And then below that, we're going to say const form data, set form data is equal to use state. And then we're going to initialize this to the data that we've already passed in to this edit watch. So we're going to set the brand, that is going to be our watch dot brand. And then we're going to set the model is going to be the watch dot model. And then the reference number is going to be the watch dot reference number. So within this page, we render over all of our watches, and we render out this edit button for each watch. We pass the watch in as a prop to this edit watch component, and we accept that prop here, and we initialize the form data for this edit watch component as this watch's brand, model, and reference number. And then here, we are also going to say const handle change is going to be a function that accepts an event. And all we're going to do here is we're going to set our form data. It's going to be all of our previous form data, but then we are going to set the event.target.name to the event.target.value. So it's basically taking all of our form data, spreading that into our new form data, but then it's setting the new input that is change. It's going to set the name of that input to the value of that input. And then that is all we're going to do here. And now we can start rendering out kind of the HTML here. So what we're going to return is a div wrapping all of this, but then we're going to render out a button. And the on click of this button is going to be a function in which we set show modal to be true. And this button is just going to say edit for them to edit the watch. And that's going to set the show modal to true, in which we are then going to show this modal. So let's first skeleton out the form that we want to show here, but then I'll add the styles here in a second. So I'm going to do show modal and return this. So if show modal is true, I want to return our modal here. And it's first going to be a wrapper div. And within that div, we're going to do another div. And within that additional div, we're going to render a span. And this span, when clicked, we're going to set our show modal to false. And we're going to render out a kind of X component. So the multiply symbol. So this is going to be a little X that we render out at the top of the modal. And this ampersand times semicolon is just us rendering that symbol out within HTML. And then below this is where we're going to render out our form. The action for now is going to just say update watch, but eventually we're going to add a server action here to actually update our watch and make that update request to our database. And then we're going to set an on submit here, in which in this on submit, we're basically just going to set show modal to be false. We're no longer going to show this modal. And then we're going to run our server action. So as the first input here, it's going to be input of type hidden, in which the name is going to be ID, and then the value is going to be our watch.id. And this is basically going to give us the ability to, within our server action, to access the ID of the watch that we want to then go ahead and update. But then below this, we're going to do a div, and then we're going to have a label in which the HTML4 is going to be brand, and then within that label is just going to be brand, and then we're going to do an input that is going to be of type text, and the ID is going to be brand. The name is going to equal the brand, and then the value, so it's going to be a controlled input. The value is going to be our form data dot brand. And let me move this all to a second line here. In the on change is going to be our handle change function. And we'll add some classes here in a second. And then I'm going to copy this div here and paste it below. And now instead of our brand, it's going to be our model. So we're going to do model. This is going to be model. And it's going to be type text, but the ID is model, the name is model, and it's going to be form data.model. And then we're going to do that one more time, but it's going to be for our reference number. So here, it's going to be reference number. The HTML4 is going to be reference number, and then the ID and name and form data dot reference number. And then below this div is where we're going to do a button that is going to just be update watch, and then it's going to be of type is equal to submit. So when they click on this function, that should trigger our server action here that we'll create, that will then update this watch. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and add all of the class names I want to this HTML, and you can copy and paste mine from my GitHub repo, or you can go ahead and paste this into ChatGPT and kind of work with it yourself and try to get ChatGPT to make you this kind of pop-up modal. So I've added all my styles here, and I think this should be pretty well set up, at least from the UI standpoint. We still need to implement the server action, but let's go ahead and check. So we see delete and edit here. Let's click on edit, and I see update watch is not defined. And that is because when I copy and pasted my styles, I forgot to turn this back into a string. So let's come back, let's click edit again, and now I see handle submit is not defined. And that is because in my copy and paste, I pasted a handle submit, in which in reality, we can just pass in an inline function here that is set show modal, and it's going to be false. So let's come back again, do it one more time, and now we see it is pre-filled with a brand, a model, but we don't see reference number. So let's come back here. And then, so this, instead of watch and camel case reference number, it's actually going to be reference underscore number, because that is how it's returned from our database. So let's come back. Let's look at this again. And now we do see the reference number. So now we can update this, and we should be able to click update watch and then see our updated watch in our list here. So now let's come back and let's create another server action. So this time around, it's going to be a new file, and it's going to be called updatewatch.js. And then I'm going to move this over a bit. Let's go to add watch here. Let's copy this entire file and let's paste it into update watch, because it's going to be also pretty dang similar to what we've done before. But at the top here, instead of add watch, let's call this update watch. It's going to accept our form data. It is going to accept a model, brand, and reference number, just like what it does here. But I'm going to also do option shift up arrow, and I'm going to say const ID is equal to form data.get ID, because we need the ID of our watch. And then we're going to do the same thing, create our cookie store, create our connection to Supabase. We're going to have our data and our user session data. If not user, we're going to say user is not authenticated within our update watch server action. And then here below, we're going to say from watches, we're going to, instead of insert, we're actually going to call update. And then instead of passing an array, we're just going to pass an object. So remove the array and just pass an object here. And then we're going to set the model is going to be our model. The brand is going to be our brand. The reference number is going to be the reference number. But we're not going to pass the user ID here. We're actually going to do dot match. And then this is where we're going to pass an object in which the ID is going to be our ID. And then the user ID is going to be our user.id. So we're going to use this Supabase function that gets our watch table. It's going to update the model, brand, and reference number for the watch that has this ID here from our form data. And it's going to be only the watch with that ID for the logged in user. And then if there's an error, I can say error, updating data. We do need to revalidate our watch list so we see the change occur, and then I'll return a message of success. So as you can see, once we kind of get the pattern for one server action, it's actually all pretty dang similar here. So now that that's in place, let's go to the edit watch component here. So I'll open components, I'll go to edit watch. And then instead of hard coding this action right here, what we can do is update watch, which is going to be this server action right here. So now with all of this in place, I should be able to update these watches in our list. So for the Omega Seamaster, I should be able to edit, and I'm going to keep this as Omega, but I'm going to do the Omega Seamaster No Time to Die version. Then I'm going to click update watch. And we see this gets updated as the Omega Seamaster No Time to Die. Then for my Rolex Submariner, let's do the Rolex Submariner, but the no date version. Now I'll update this, and then we see it is updated. So we have successfully added our watches, deleted them, updated them, and we are also reading our watches in this watch list. And we also have our user authentication here. Now I kind of forget what user I'm signed in as. Let me go ahead and check that real quick. So let's go to our watch list here. I'm not going to console.log watches anymore, but I will console log my user. And I see that it's Ryan at coderyan.io is my user. I'm going to delete this console.log, and let's just make sure that I can indeed sign out. And then let's relog in at Ryan at coderyan.io. So I'm going to send the magic link. I'm going to click log in. And then I do indeed see my watch list with my 2 watches that we just kind of created and updated here. So everything looks to be working correctly here. We now have a functioning app where we can create, read, update, destroy from our Supabase database. We can log in with different users, and we have a full functioning app. And like, honestly, if you understand everything we've done here, you can build so many different applications with just having some sort of database, some sort of like user interface, which we have here, and then also having some sort of authentication, which you've learned in this entire video. But now the final step here is to now deploy our application. So to do this, I'm going to first go add this project to GitHub. So I'm going to go to github.com. Now I'm logged into my GitHub account here. I'm going to click the plus icon to create a new repository here. I'm going to name this watch-list. It's going to be public, and I'm going to create this repository. And then I'm going to copy this git remote add origin and then the URL right here. Now I'm going to come back, and in my terminal here, my non-running terminal, I'm going to clear this, and I'm going to say git status, and I'm going to add all this. So git add period. And I'm going to do git status. I see all my files here. I'm going to git commit add watch list project. And we still might need to make an update here, which I'll cover in a second. And then I'm going to git remote add origin. So what I just copied from GitHub. And I'm going to call git push, and I'm going to get an error because I need to git push and do this command. So I'm going to copy and paste that. And now, if I refresh my GitHub, I should indeed see my watch list project here, which I do. So now that this is added to GitHub, I can now go to Vercel and deploy this project. Now we are going to have one issue here, but we'll cover that in a second. At least I think it's going to be an issue. But now I'm here over at Vercel.com, and I'm logged into my account here. If you don't have a Vercel account, you can go to Vercel.com and you can connect it to your GitHub for absolutely free. So you can go ahead and do that now if you haven't done that, but connect your Vercel to your GitHub. You should see it automatically. If you can't find it, just Google quickly, connect to Vercel to GitHub. It should be super, super easy to do. But once you've done that, click on this little triangle here at the top to come to your dashboard. And then we're going to click add new. And I'm going to do project. And then the project I'm going to do is I'm going to import from a Git repository. So what we just added to GitHub, and I'm going to do watch list. So I'm going to go ahead and import that now. Now we do need to do a couple of things here. So for our environment variables, we do need to add our 2 env keys. So let's go back to our VS Code here. Let's go to our .env.local. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy my next public Supabase URL. I'm going to come back. I'm going to paste that in as the key. And I'm also going to grab this value. And I'm going to come back. I'm going to paste it in as a value. I'm going to click add. And now that I've added that, I'm going to add another key and value here. So I'm going to grab next public Supabase add-on key. Paste that in here, come back, and then I'm going to copy this entire key here, come back, paste it in as the value, and click add. So we've added those, and now I'm going to go ahead and deploy. Although we still are going to have one issue here. So the issue that we're going to have is I'm going to go Command-Shift F, and I'm going to search for localhost 3000. And as you can see in my auth form here, we still have the redirect set to http://localhost3000/auth/callback. So we have hard coded this in here. Now, what I think is going to happen here is I think that this is going to break because in our deployed application, once this finally finishes deploying, it's going to give us a new URL that is no longer going to have this in place. It's going to be something other than localhost. So to fix this, I might be able to just pass in a relative path here as like /auth/callback, but I'm not sure that's going to work. But we'll go ahead and wait for our application to be deployed, and then we'll kind of play around with making sure that this does indeed work correctly, and we can indeed add users to our deployed application. So it looks like, congratulations, you just deployed your project to Vercel. And when I click on this, we see that my base URL is now https://watchlist plum-vercel.app. So let's go ahead and add or try to log in here. I don't think it's going to work. So I'm going to do my code Ryan here. I'm going to send a magic link, and it sends. But then when I click on login here, you see it takes me to localhost 3000, but this isn't going to work because my app isn't at localhost 3000 anymore. So it's actually at this URL. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this deployed URL here, and I'm going to paste it right here. So now it's going to be at https://watchlist plum.vercel.app/auth/callback. So we're going to paste this in here, but I also need to deploy this change. So I'm going to do git add, git commit-m, update base URL. I'm going to do git push. And this will deploy on Vercel automatically here in just a second. And I think this is the only place we'll use localhost 3000. I do have localhost 3000 in my README, but we don't really care about that. So I've deployed this change. Let's go back to Vercel here. And I should see, if I continue to the dashboard here, I can see that it is currently building right now with the commit of update base URL. So it looks like it's already done building here. So let me refresh. It looks like everything's good. So I'm going to click on this. And now let me go ahead and try to do this again. So Ryan at coderyan.io. I'm going to send my magic link, hit send. I'm going to click on it here. And now we do indeed see the watch list. So thank you so much for checking this out. It looks like everything is indeed working here. So really, with everything that you have learned in this tutorial, you have learned how to create, read, update, and destroy from our database, add authentication, and create a full stack Next.js application and deploying it as well. So thanks so much for checking this out, and I'll see you in that next one.